Good. So, how you doing?
What's going on, guys?
Today we're going to be looking at the idea of a hurricane, since for the first time in my lifetime, there are two hurricanes in the Gulf at the same time. And with this historic moment, we thought we should go ahead and do hurricanes. And what do you drink in a hurricane?
You drink hurricanes.
Exactly.
Which is not necessarily a Florida drink. It's actually more of a New Orleans drink, but it fits the bill.
Exactly. It's one of those fruity ones, and I think it was one of those where they had whatever they had available, and they just made a big punch out of it, and that's what we got. So today, we're going to make that, and what we are going to use is the same rum we used a couple weeks ago, Floricana, and we're going to do 2 parts of white rum.
And Floricana is a Nicaraguan rum. They've got a couple different kinds. We're actually using the 4-year that we have now, but they also make a 12 and a 20-year as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then 2 parts of dark rum. That's
maybe a
Sean's
little
drink.
more there.
That's Sean's drink.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, then 2 parts of passion fruit juice.
Ooh, okay.
1 part orange juice. Splash of lime juice. A little simple syrup to give it a little sweetness, and
we're making this right into the glass so that we're doing it up here. Gonna add a little bit of grenadine to give some color.
And then just stir it up.
Now, Frank made 1 drink at a time, which is a great way to do it. Now, I prefer to actually make a pitcher at a time when we're going to make it on up. So we'll go ahead and pour a pitcher at a time, and that's always good for friends and for everything in between when you're having a real hurricane party.
Exactly. Or when you're just home by yourself.
Or you're just home by yourself, too. That'll do it, too, as well.
So, as I was doing my research about hurricanes, I went and looked at how far back, and there's lots of storms that they have records of, but there's not a lot of information written down about them until really 1900. And because one of the biggest storms that ever hit in American history happened in 1900, and that happened in Galveston, Texas. But that hurricane came across the Keys on its way to Galveston, Texas.
So it came in through and up through the Gulf and then up into Texas.
Yeah, exactly. And it was devastating. There's a book called Isaac's Storm that's all about it. It's really fascinating. So that was the first one that I started looking at. And then between 1900 and 1950, they're all kind of named where they hit. They didn't start using names for the hurricanes until 1950. So the first big one that I found after that was actually in 1906. And we kind of talked a little bit about it before.
When you were talking about the railroad.
Exactly.
Yes.
So this one hit and did a lot of damage to Flagler's Railroad as he was building it.
And that was the overseas railroad that he was building basically
Correct.
from Miami to Key West.
Correct. And this was more in the upper Keys, closer to Key Largo.
Okay.
And what happened in this one is there was over 300 fatalities, of which about 150 plus were railroad workers. And the railroad workers were living on houseboats, and the houseboats sunk in the hurricane. So they didn't get them all in time and stuff like that. And I can't imagine what it was like back then with looking at a hurricane or know where it's coming.
Well, I mean, with us too. I mean, we're able to look at the Weather Channel, and we look for Jim Cantori to be telling us, hey, we've got days are coming and even a week coming ahead of time before it actually gets here. These ones that we've been tracking now for over a week that are coming into the Gulf. And so back in the day, it used to be like, hey, the clouds are looking kind of funny today,
Exactly.
And then all of a sudden you have 140 mile an hour winds coming at you. So.
And so that hurricane was one of them that we talked about in that period of time. And
that was 1906?
Yep. And then there was another one in the Keys in 1909, which destroyed over 400 buildings and destroyed over 300 boats in the Keys at the time. And we're not talking little boats. We're talking about the schooners and the trading ships that were going back and forth at that time. And then it was followed by another one in 1919, which They estimated that it dropped on Key West 13.5 inches of rain.
Holy smokes! Key West is practically below
Yeah,
sea level
exactly.
anyway. So I mean,
So-
it's,
Yeah, so tons of shipping was lost with that one as well. Now, for us here, the first major one that I found that really touched Sarasota was called the Tampa Bay hurricane, or sometimes it's called the Clearwater hurricane, because that's where it went ashore. But here in Sarasota, the storm surge from it pushed well over 1.5 feet of water all across St. Armand's Key. The bridge out to Siesta Key was destroyed. Tons of other damage out on Siesta
And what year was
Key.
this?
This is 1921.
okay.
And actually,
So really, Sarasota's just getting built up. I mean, Sarasota's just barely coming together.
Exactly.
So.
And this was in October 25th, that this happened. Now, when we look at hurricanes here in Florida, our biggest months are September and October for hurricanes.
The later in the season.
Exactly. And so when I looked at the dates of these major hurricanes, so many of them were in October and September. And then, so that one was in November, or October, I mean, but the next one was really fascinating. It's called the Okeechobee hurricane.
Okay.
So it came ashore, I think, close to Jupiter, and it pushed south, and the winds
So it came
pushed-
from the Atlantic instead of up in the Gulf.
Exactly, and it pushed the water down to the south end of the
Lake Okeechobee?
Yep.
Yep.
So that it went over the levees, and the water spread over 450 square miles, and at some point it was 12 feet deep.
Holy smokes! Through the Everglades.
Yeah. But that's just incredible, because if you've ever been to Lake Okeechobee, there's all these big levees around it, and the lake is kind of sunken down, and you can drive and go up on the levees. For it to be able to push the water and that much water in the lake out, the winds had to be so strong.
Yeah.
But it did damage from Jupiter all the way across through Fort Myers. Sarasota had some damage in it, and it just damaged the whole southern part of the state.
Yeah.
And then after that one was the big one, the 1935 hurricane, which they estimate was a Category 5. And they believe that there's only been 3 Category 5 hurricanes that have come ashore in Florida.
So that was the one in 35.
Yep. And then
Andrew, the one of the most famous.
and then the other one they believe was earlier than this.
Okay.
So, which is kind of interesting, because when we look at these storms, we're seeing more and more of them get up to 5s in the past 10 years
Yeah.
than we have in that 100 years.
Well, one of the things I've also heard is that things go through this 100-year cycle, and they're very cyclical in what they do, and so that we're actually getting into this time now to where we're compared to those storms that were the turn of the century storms, and that, and you know, from the 1900s to the 1920s, that we're
Right.
kind of in the middle of that right now.
Exactly.
So we're due some good ones, basically.
Yeah, that's not good though.
No.
So that one was huge, and just to give you an idea, that storm, at that time they clocked the winds at 85 miles an hour sustained.
Wow.
With well over gusts of 200 miles per hour. There were almost 500 fatalities in the Keys, and many of them, and this was the sad part about it in this one, is, so we're talking about the 1930s here during the Great Depression.
Right.
And so there were tons of relief programs to put people to work, especially young men.
After
during the Great Depression,
okay.
yeah. So there was a work camp in the Keys for war veterans of World War I,
Yep.
and over 150 of them got trapped and died during that, because these projects were all over the country to try and get young men and middle-aged men to work, since there was no work for them to do.
And to actually do socially good things. You know,
Exactly.
create roads, create buildings, create structures.
Well, and what I bet they were doing is working on some of the parks and stuff like that, because they
Yeah.
built a ton of parks during that period of time, both at the state level and at the federal level. So that was an unfortunate thing to see, was that hurricane destroyed those people. But it also was the one that destroyed the overseas railroad.
Gotcha.
And Flagler, they just never chose to rebuild it after that point.
And that's where we talked about, when we were talking about the overseas railroad, there's still portions of that are there today.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, you know, mirroring the
Yeah.
highway that goes over now. But
So they said that one the center of it came over Craig Key, which is more in the upper Keys.
gotcha.
Now, The next major hurricane that hit Florida was during World War II, and it was right at the end of the war in 1945. And in Key Largo, there was a huge naval air station called Richmond Naval Air Station, and it had blimps and airplanes and all that kind of stuff that were there where they were doing training and everything, and the hurricane hit it, and it destroyed the airport.
Wow.
It kind of, the description that I was reading reminded me of what happened to Homestead Air Base with Andrew, and it was kind of leveled. So it destroyed, there was 25 blimps there. There was almost 400 aircraft that were destroyed. Thank God it was at the end of the war effort, and these weren't vital for the defense of the country.
Yeah.
Most of the people got moved out, which was good, but there was so much equipment that was destroyed. So that one I thought was really fascinating too. And then in 1947, there was a big hurricane that went right across the strait from Fort Lauderdale over to between Fort Myers and Sarasota, is where it came out into the Gulf again, and just did a tremendous amount of damage there as well. Now, what was fascinating, the hurricanes in the 19-teens, they really hurt the Florida land boom, because there was a big...
Well, and the tour that was driven by tourism, driven by people coming down here, buying property, wanting to make this basically their winter residence, and then all of a sudden they say, whoa, what happens when my winter residence gets blown away?
Exactly.
You know?
So it happened again in the 1940s with these two big storms that people started thinking again, because when we look at that post-war era, lots of people were moving all over the country because they had gone as a soldier and been at a base, or a sailor at a base, and they liked it there, and they decided to move to that area, and all of a sudden now they're finding they moved down here to Florida, holy crap, these huge storms. Now, 1950 was a big year because they started naming the storms at that point. And what they started doing was naming them by the alphabet, that like A is alpha, B is beta, all of that kind of stuff. So they started doing that with them
before they actually came up with the names like they have now.
Correct. That doesn't happen until like the 1970s, I don't think.
Oh, really? Okay.
No, it's 1960s, because the next big storm. Now, for us, 1950 was a big year because this is one of the storms that actually hit Tampa Bay, and it hit us as well.
Okay.
So that's kind of
us is in Sarasota.
Yeah. And that's kind of one of the last times we see a major hurricane coming through Sarasota, or close to Sarasota. But the big one was 1960, and that was Hurricane Donna.
Right.
And Donna was a big deal because it was so devastating. And I think at the time, the amount of damage it did was what would be the equivalent today of like $40 or $50 billion worth of damage. And
that was the one that went into Tampa?
No, this is the one. This one came across through Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and across. And when I think about that, there were so much fewer buildings and structures here to destroy at that time that was a massive amount of damage. So Donna was another one of the big storms, and that's really one of the first named ones. And I believe they do not use that name anymore. Just to give you an example of what it did, it destroyed 75 or 25% of the entire grapefruit crop in the state of Florida.
Holy smokes! Okay.
So, you know, and we see that with a bunch of these other storms, is they do a tremendous amount of damage to the citrus crops.
Okay.
Now, the citrus crops come into harvest time during the wintertime, and so this is right when they're
ripening and getting bigger. So, I mean, it would knock the fruit off the trees and basically...
Exactly. And it also devastated tons and tons of mangroves. And here in Florida, the mangrove is so important because it holds the barrier islands in place and helps barrier islands to grow. It's also huge fisheries and stuff like that where little fish hang out and all of that. So by destroying this, especially in South Florida, that was devastating to the environment as well. So for us then, I jumped to Hurricane Andrew. And this is something that almost all of us can remember because it was so devastating. I know that when I have driven through Miami today, one of the ways that we go to the Keys is through Homestead. And to know that everything there was completely destroyed. One of the statistics that I read was 99% of all trailer homes in Miami-Dade County were destroyed.
Well, the crazy thing, too, about Andrew was actually how that storm developed. Because basically, for those of you who aren't in Florida, I hate to say it, but if it's not like a Cat 3, I'm not really paying much attention to it. A Cat 1, Cat 2, it's going to get a little windy, but it's really not a big deal. So what happened was the people in Miami went to bed at night, and they saw this hurricane that was coming to them. It was a Category 1. It was supposed to be a Category 1, maybe a Category 2.
Right.
And everybody went to bed, and everything was great, and they're like, no big deal. I'll put the storm shutters up. We'll pull in the lawn chairs, that kind of thing. It's not going to be a big deal. However, they woke up the next morning, and it was barreling down on top of them as a Category 5.
Right, and it was really small and narrow and extremely intense.
Yeah, and so it just absolutely took everyone by surprise. No one saw it developing the way that it did. And to the point that when they all of a sudden realized it, it was way too late. It was too late to get out of the way. It was too late to do anything. So that's what was so devastating. And the neat thing, not the neat thing, the crazy thing about Andrew too is its far-reaching effects, both in the positive and the negative. So one of the things is with construction, which we work a lot with Longbow Key Builders and some of our other construction companies in town here, Florida has developed Miami-Dade guidelines for building construction to be able to handle hurricane-type things because of Andrew and because of the damage that it did. So we've seen some positive things from it that, we're building better than we used to. We've got more restrictions than that. But then also, too, we see some of the crazy things. Like, I don't know if you guys know, but one of the things that we're battling in Florida right now, especially through the Everglades, are pythons.
Yeah.
So we've got crazy snakes loose that are invasive species. Where they are suspecting most of these came from, in Homestead, there was this giant reptile farm where they had pythons and all kinds of crazy animals that this storm just literally blew the whole thing down and pushed them all into the Everglades. So ever since then, it's like a heyday. So now we're seeing huge environmental impacts, even to this day now, where these animals have gotten loose and gotten out because of Andrew.
To the point where you can get a license and go hunting them in the Everglades. And there's been a couple TV shows even that go and talk about it.
And they've come as far north as they've been spotted in Mayaca State Park and things here right in Sarasota.
Yeah. Now, one of the most fascinating stories that I heard about Hurricane Andrew actually came from the Janet Reno, who was the Attorney General for the Clinton administration. And her mother survived the hurricane of 1935. Mm-hmm. And with her own two hands, she built the house that she lived in so it would withstand any hurricane that would ever come through that area again.
In Miami, down there.
In Miami. And Janet Reno and her mom rode out Andrew in that house, and nothing happened to it. So there's a documentary about it that I saw a long time ago, and it was really fascinating hearing Janet Reno talk about what it was like because the house was almost like a cave kind of, built out of concrete and rock and all of that, including the roof and everything. And so as you look at that to me was one of those amazing stories, because when you go to Miami today, you see the roads, wherever there's a crossroad, you see the names of the streets written on the road because all the signs were gone and people had no clue
where they were at or what was going. So.
Yeah, exactly. So that was
I would compare that to when soldiers wear dog tags and you don't know who they are. So fortunately, they lose the street signs and do the same thing in the road.
Yeah. The next year that I thought was really fascinating was 2004. Because for us here in Florida, we had 4 hurricanes in about a month travel across. And so we had Hurricane Charley.
And they were back to back to back. It seemed like every weekend we had one.
Yeah, so we had one on, going back to Andrew for a minute.
Yep.
Andrew happened on August 24th. So today,
it wasn't actually it was early in the season.
Exactly. And this one, it's the A1.
Yeah.
So they go in that alphabetical order. So it was the first one of the season. And that, it just caused so much damage. But that's yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah. So, that's right.
Yeah. So for us, 2004, we had Hurricane Charley, which was August 8th or August 13th.
And that was the one that affected us the closest.
Correct.
So, yeah.
It went right through Punta Gorda, through Arcadia and up. And then Hurricane Francis was September 5th. Hurricane Ivan was September 16th, and then Hurricane Jean was September 25th. So I remember at our house we had put up plywood over the windows, and I took it down after Charley, and then when I put it up for the next one, I didn't take them down, and I just kept. I put Fort O on the painted on it, and I just kept writing the hurricanes' names and the dates of them that we survived. So
well, Charley was so crazy too, because Charley was actually supposed to dial in on Sarasota here, and I remember at the time buckling down. I ended up sending wife and son actually to grandmother's house to weather the storm there. I stayed at our house with our dog. Same thing. Did the windows, did all set. Actually, took a little bit of a nap, was kind of gearing up for it. And when I woke from the nap, it didn't hit us. It actually went south, and so and not only did it go south, but it actually completely went around us and went in and hit Arcadia horribly at the time, which was a little bit crazy because all the people in Sarasota that were expecting it to hit us all went inland to Arcadia, and that's where they were at, and actually rode out through the middle of it. Yeah, unfortunately.
So, and then we have seen a number of major storms in the past couple years with Irma, which really was devastating to the whole state because it just went right up the center of it. And then Michael, which decimated Mexico Beach and the Panhandle up there. And they just seem to keep getting stronger and stronger. Now, the two that were in the Gulf, Laura and Marco, they are
the
both,
current ones.
They're both Category 1s. Maybe, is Laura going to come a 2?
It's going to become a 2, but when it hits land, they're expecting it somewhere near Galveston, I believe, or the Louisiana border, and so they're expecting it to. Oh, this Category 3, we're being told. So, but there's it's supposed to hit a 3, but by the time I think it gets to land, it's going to quickly deteriorate. So they're not expecting a huge impact like you would from a 4 or 5.
Right. So that's a little bit of our history of hurricanes here in the state of Florida. There's tons and tons of resources on this that you can go online. There's books about it. It's really fascinating to see how this event really changes the state, because it's not just the wind. It's also the tremendous amount of rain that it gives. It spawns tornadoes, all kinds of craziness, storm surge.
And even more so, it's the after effects of that. So, I mean, the after effects of being without power for 14 days. So we had, what was the one that we had, was it 2 years ago? 3 years ago?
Irma?
Was it Irma that actually was out in the Gulf?
Oh.
That was supposed to skirt us. That one was actually a really unusual one. That was the one that I was kind of the most worried about. I think that was 2 years ago. And it actually, for Sarasota, did a really weird thing. Instead of it having a storm surge, because it was just far enough up, it was supposed to just ride the coast. Was it Irma? It was supposed to just ride. It was supposed to ride the coast and be horrible for us, but it actually went further out in the Gulf. And what ended up happening was
it went into the state.
It ran.
And we were on the other side of it.
Gotcha. So it actually sucked the moisture out of the bay, and actually the bay was pretty much dry. I remember we had friends of ours, Bob and Eric, were actually riding a 4-wheeler in the middle of the bay because there was no water in the bay.
Yeah,
so
you know,
it was a little crazy.
You know what my father-in-law used to say about that kind of stuff?
What?
Can't put brains where they aren't.
That's exactly right.
So
too many hurricanes is the problem.
Exactly. All right. Well, next week we were going to do the show for this week, which is going to be about Florida writers.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to figure out. I've got it down to 2 drinks.
Oh.
One is Torpedo Juice from one of my favorite authors' books called Torpedo Juice by Tim Dorsey, and the other one is Travis McGee's drink. Called the Busted Flush,
which is also the name of his boat.
Yeah,
exactly. His houseboat that he lived on.
Exactly. So we're going to figure out one of those 2 drinks, depending on which one's more palatable.
Now we do have a question from the audience.
Yes, has an eye wall actually ever hit Sarasota? Everything's hit north or south.
Northern
Never,
south.
yeah.
Right. So.
All the research, all the ones that I read, none of the eye walls ever hit here.
And part of that is attributed to the legend of Sarah DeSoto. So, which we can talk about. So we talked about Sarah DeSoto a couple of weeks ago. So it's the legend that actually she was a Native American at the time who lived.
She was the son of Hernan DeSoto, who
possibly
landed here in
maybe that,
Manatee
and she loved
County.
someone, and her love for some reason.
No. The story goes that she got sick and got better, and then was taken care of by the chief's son. The chief's son got sick from whatever she had and died.
Gotcha.
No,
and,
it was
and
no, I'm sorry. It's the other way around.
Yeah.
So she died from taking care of the chief's son, and then in
her tears got in the land and made it toward no hurricanes.
Oh my
actually
God.
is.
Just shut up. Stick to your day job. Stick to your day job.
Indian burial ground
That's
offshore.
the
That's
story.
what it is. Okay.
So there's also some fun ones about Ringling doing some rituals out there during the 1920s to keep the storms away from his circus as well. So you can go and do your conspiracy theories stuff and have fun with that.
Gotcha.
Right?
So, the aliens. It was the aliens.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Until next week, we'll see you. Enjoy your hurricanes. Cheers.
Yes.
Yes.